Okay, item 10, conduct of business. First item is A, receive oral report and provide direction to staff and the Caltrain JPB regarding parking on First Avenue.
Okay, thank you and good evening. So as a follow-up from last council meeting when we went through some of the questions that the community had asked, I was asked to give just a quick update as to the status. I'm sorry.
Just introduce yourself so the
I'm sorry.
TV audience.
I've been here so many times, I assume everyone knows me. Raphael Bolin with JPB Caltrain. So I'm giving a quick update this evening on where we are with the parking and some proposed mitigation to some of the parking losses that we've been working jointly with city staff on. So real quickly, just quick update on the parking, discuss some of the mitigation, and then just take any questions you may have. So how we got here was during the September 4th outreach meeting, there were some individuals from the community who had specific questions about parking losses, in particular about what was going to happen First Avenue in the after condition. Then provided an update to City Council, and the City Council had some of their own questions regarding that. So after that, sat down with city staff and worked through where we are on First Avenue, came up with 2 alternative mitigation strategies, but also decided to take it one more level and say, well, let's look at all the street parking and see if there's something we can do, and then just present that to the council. So what I'm going to give you right now is the as planned. So this is what the contract plans say today as far as parking. The minuses, you can't see them real well, but these are minuses, or I'm sorry, those are pluses, these are minuses. So red equals spots that will be lost from the existing condition. Green represents additional parking that is not there today. So very quickly, San Mateo, this is San Mateo up by what used to be the lumber yard, what's currently the transit center. This is San Bruno up here going up down on this street. So what we discovered at San Mateo is that there are 15 spots that are there currently that get lost, and 5 additional spots get added for a net loss of 10 parking spots on San Mateo. The reason for that is that in the final condition, there's going to be a center turning lane which is required to facilitate people entering or leaving the station, and that actually means that we can't get the full width in there, and some parking spots get lost. And then this is of course now the southern section of the project site. So I'm going to start with First Avenue. I erroneously gave the council the information of 42 parking spots lost. The actual number today is 31 spots, which I understand is not ideal, and I'll talk about that in a second, but 42 is a mistake on my behalf. My designer just took a Google map, measured and divided by 20, and it's a little more complicated than that because there's driveways and there's other impediments today that mean that not everything is as simple as that. And so the spots that get lost at First Avenue are all on the northern end of the project site. So this bulb out is the cul-de-sac that's there now. Melody Toyota is on the upper left hand where I'm pointing the laser. So these 6 spots that get lost is because there's no longer a street there. So previously First Avenue flowed into San Mateo. However, the bulk of the spots that are projected to be lost under the current plan is because of the ramp and staircase that are located here. And I'll go into that in a second. And then just to follow up with the rest of it, so that equals a total of 31 spots on First Avenue lost. In addition to that, there are 11 spots on San Mateo, up by Keynes and San Mateo up on the left of your drawing. And then a net of 11 spots on, 16 spots on Huntington. So there's some additional parking provided up by on the east side. However, that's offset by some losses here because Keynes now turns, whereas previously Huntington flowed into San Mateo. So now I'd like to just talk about some of the things we've worked with the city on. Some of what you're going to see here is a little preliminary, so I'll describe that as we go through. So what we did is we sat down with the city and looked at all the locations in which parking would be less than what's there today, and tried to see what of any of those spots could be recovered. And then we looked at different alternatives, in particular for First Avenue, to see how many spots we could recoup in that area. And finally, we looked at just different options for the remainder of the project site, in particular San Mateo and Huntington. And I should note that we are continuing to work with the designer to see if there are any other individual spots that we can gain back. We're never going to get the same bang for our buck as we see in these two options. However, if we are able to just squeeze things up and gain an extra spot or two, that's what we're going to do as the design progresses. So I'm going to start with San Mateo Avenue. So once again, this is the area up by where the transit center drop-off area is going to be, where the lumber yard is. So in the current condition, this exists, but this is a solid curb line. So we recognize that by dropping back that curb to match this one, we were able to gain 7 spots from what we have. So these numbers you're going to see in green, when I say 7 additional, that's 7 from the last figure I showed you. It still equals a net loss of 3 parking spots on San Mateo. We were previously showing 10, now 3, so that's where the 7 come from. And then First Avenue, we looked at 2 alternatives. And to make this work, there's still some discussion that has to happen between JPB and the city regarding what kind of licensing agreement that would happen, because the property line is this dashed line you see over there. So that's some discussion that would still have to happen to make this work. But from a purely engineering point of view, what we looked at is how can we mitigate the loss of 31 spots all on this one street. So what we came up with as a first alternative was if we simply extended the amount of parallel parking and we just took it all the way out, we can gain back 18 spots. So that still means a net loss of 13 in that area. However, obviously 13 better than 31. At this point, I'm just going to give you a very quick description of why we were showing this many loss and why we're able to, at this late hour, gain some of them back. When we first designed this project and started talking with the city back in 2000, well, way back in 2005, but then again, as we resurrected it in 2009, one of the big unknowns was how many tracks we were going to build. And so the whole project, as you recall, was staged to allow for 4 tracks or 2 tracks, depending on where high speed was going to be at that point. So throughout the right-of-way, we were able to maintain a 2 or a 4-track alignment and preserve the parking. Only at this very northern end was there a problem. And the problem is that we could not fit 4 tracks, a staircase, a doubling back ramp, a sidewalk, and parking. So at that point, we ended up losing these spaces, and that's how we got to 31. Things are, of course, a little bit different than they were a few years ago. And so we're looking at less likelihood that we're looking at 4 tracks anytime soon than we were back in 2009, if that makes any sense. So this would allow us, if we could take off the table, even temporarily, the idea of 4 tracks, it does free up some space over here and allows us to do this extended parking. So then we took it one step further and said, well, if we're already pushing that curb line back, what else could we do? So we looked at the possibility of, instead of just doing parallel spots, if we actually angled these back, a little different, but it does free up even more parking. So now we're looking at 37 additional spots. If you recall, there were actually a loss of 31, so it's a net gain actually in this alignment of 6 spots. So we're still working with the designer on the specifics of how that would look in terms of sidewalks, tie-ins, and things like that. But just big picture, it does appear that we could add 37 spots from where we are today for a net gain of 6 if we did this. So just a summary total of what is proposed to be reduced in the after condition and what we're proposing to mitigate. So this first column, this proposed loss, that's if we did nothing different than what's in the contract plans today. So what that tells you is oh, I'm sorry, except for the parallel parking at First Avenue. It's assuming that that happens regardless. So obviously if that doesn't, you're back to 31. But assuming that we're able to make that work, that's 13 spots lost at First, 14 at San Mateo, 16 at Huntington, for a total of 43 spots lost. The proposed column, the last column on your right, represents if we were able to do some of this other stuff we were talking about. So the 6 added assumes that we're able to do these angled spots. In addition, something we haven't talked about, but something we're discussing with city staff is the city has shown some interest in leasing or in some way having possession of the existing Caltrain temporary station. So at the end of the job, we're no longer going to be using that station. All the Caltrain passengers shift to the new station, and the city has had some interest in that as either overflow for Lionsgate or maybe just to mitigate parking losses in the community. So if you add that, depending on the configuration, you can go anywhere from 70 to 90 spots on the west side of the tracks, which gives you a net gain of about anywhere from 46 to 66 spots. And I can take any questions you might have at this time.
Any questions? Irene?
I don't have a question, but I do appreciate you taking our comments from last time and working so hard to find ways to gain parking instead of losing so many that we saw. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken?
I'm just trying to get a handle on what's lost and what was existing.
Right.
Before any construction,
Right.
there was a curb line along the right-of-way.
Correct.
And uninterrupted, I don't know if we have an idea or an accurate count of how many could possibly park along there. It wasn't marked off or anything. It was just available parking.
Yeah, so good. You're talking about First Avenue in particular?
First Avenue.
Yeah, so that's a good distinction you just made there. The after condition will have striped T-style parking spots. The before did not. In my comparison, my designer looked at a standard parking spot. It is quite possible that more stuff was getting crammed in depending how people were parking. But these numbers that we came up with, these adds and subtracts, these net losses, were done exactly by doing that kind of calculation. We actually took what's there before we
Based on lineal feet.
It's lineal feet, exactly.
And do we have any documentation or any idea of what the parking demand was prior? I mean, I don't recall, my experiences in driving down First Avenue or driving through the Bel Air that there was, during the day, there was never any solid parking along there. I mean, I'm sure there was parking at night, cars parked at night, but because there's no train station, we're introducing additional parking for train passengers now, which is going to conflict whether or not we have sufficient parking or not. It's going to conflict with the residents.
Right. So I did not do a parking study per se on First Avenue. I can tell you anecdotally because I worked there quite a bit with the box culvert and then obviously the follow-on contract. You are absolutely correct that the parking in the evening is a huge premium. What I've anecdotally noticed, and take that for what it is, standard disclaimers apply, but basically the east side seems to be at capacity. The west side, where we were doing some work earlier, it tends to be a lot easier to find spots there. People don't tend to want to park on the west side of First Avenue as much. That being said, a lot of the residents on First Avenue are either rentals or for whatever reason they have a lot of vehicles there. When we did the box culvert, how we worked around that is we would literally, in the morning, go remind people, knock on the door and say, oh, by the way, remember there's a parking restriction between this time and that time. But we did not have major issues with that, but as you correctly point out, we're changing the pattern of it by introducing a Caltrain station where one doesn't exist today.
My last comment is, I don't particularly like the diagonal parking. Mm-hmm. So if you just continue with parallel parking on the west side of First Avenue, I mean, what sort of numbers do you get there?
So you're talking about this alternative right here?
Right.
Yeah. So you end up with a net loss of 13 spaces from what's there today. And where those are, you lose 7 of them actually in a part of the street that doesn't exist anymore because that was Melody. You also lose a further 5 at a new pedestrian walk because you can't have a car parked right up against a crosswalk just for sight distance. And then the last of the parking loss is because of this turnaround. So there is some loss. However, primarily, of course, the parking demand is up against the residences. The Melody Toyota portion We worked with Melody very early on in the contract. We found out what their need was, which was to stage a vehicle there. We provided a drop-off zone for that. There really wasn't a lot of parking demand off
Right.
like Melody itself.
No, I think our concern is, you know, what are the residents along First Avenue going to experience as far as loss of,
Right.
you know, what they're used to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by and large, these figures all focus on this extreme northern end of it. Everything from there south is unchanged. So that if there's a parking spot there today, there'll be a parking spot in the after condition. We just focused on the north end because that's where the big losses were. So I don't want to give the impression that we were removing parking from the whole First Avenue. We actually weren't.
And so,
talking about most of it.
if I could, my last comment, those parking spaces close to Melody, close to that dead end,
Yeah.
are going to be a premium for train riders.
Yes.
In your opinion, because of the staircases, the ramps? Okay.
That is probably
So-
a true statement. Obviously, Caltrain charges to park, and the city, as I understand it, does not for street parking. So I agree with you.
Okay.
There is a ramp, as we discussed. This is an access to the station.
Yeah, okay.
So if you're parked right here, you are actually in one of the better spots.
Yeah,
I mean, not that we would advocate that, but I agree. I mean, that is a concern.
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for the JPP? Thank you very much. Keep us
Thank you.
posted. Mr. Rico?
Robert Rico, 7th Avenue. Just two questions, or a question and a comment. I would be leaning towards requesting that you consider putting in perpendicular parking along there for additional spots, and the other comment more, using the current Caltrain parking as additional replacement spots or whatever doesn't really tie in to this end. I mean, people are not going to park down opposite Lions Field or whatever and walk to their homes or whatever. So yes, it would be nice for the city to maybe be able to use that for things in the Lions Field area, but to say that those 40 or 50 or more spaces are substituting for some of the loss because of the construction up between Pine and San Bruno Avenue, I think is not the right conclusion to draw. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.